Hello, life science. How are you? I don't know about you, but all this remote learning has got me exhausted. And when I'm exhausted, there's nothing I like to do better than enjoy a nice cup of tea. So, if you don't mind, while this lesson's going on, I'm just going to be getting this ready to enjoy. Oh, delightful. I'll just wait for that. In the meantime, let's enjoy a science lesson, shall we? So, in the course of studying life science, of course, you need to learn the basics of how life itself works. And once we have an idea of the mechanisms and the processes that make life work on planet Earth, we want to look at all the examples of life working itself out. We've done bacteria, we've done protists, we've done fungi. The next kingdom in our list is the kingdom of plants. So we're going to start the next unit, plants, with a term, botany, which is the study of plants. So let's get going. First, let's begin with some basic plant anatomy. So there's a couple different kinds of plants, and one category of plants are called woody plants. They are sturdy, and they live for a long time. You'll know this term particularly if you've been to a garden store or the part of a hardware store that sells garden plants. They're called perennial plants. They are plants that grow year after year. The root per meaning through, like persevere, and then ennial meaning like, annual, like years. So perennial means through the years, and any plant that's labeled perennial will grow year after year, and you don't need to replant it every year. So another kind of plant is herbaceous plants. They don't have sturdy trunks or stems like the woody plants do. So under the category of herbaceous plants, if you're in the garden store, you'd be looking for things like annual plants. Those would be plants that only live for 1 year, as their name suggests. And then there's also biennial plants, which only live for 2 years. So far we've got woody plants and herbaceous plants. The woody plants are sturdy. They have strong trunks and stems. And the herbaceous plants don't have sturdy trunks or stems, and they only live 1 or 2 years. So when we're talking about the different parts of plants, they've got various organs, just like you have organs, right? We're all made of cells. A lot of cells working together make a tissue, and a bunch of tissues working together make an organ, and a bunch of organs working together make a you. Plants have organs as well, and they come in a couple different categories. First of all, we've got vegetative organs. Vegetative organs are parts of the plant that are not involved in reproduction. But if there's the ones that are not involved, then the other category of organ would be the organs that are involved in reproduction. Those are called the reproductive plant organs. Okay, so we've got vegetative organs, reproductive organs. Moving on. There are, in addition to types of plants and types of plant organs, types of plant tissue. The first in our list is meristematic tissue. They contain undifferentiated cells. Now, what is an undifferentiated cell? They are cells that haven't specialized in any particular function. Did you know that you have undifferentiated cells as well? You don't have very many of them anymore, but back before you were born, you had lots of them. In fact, that's all you were. In humans, we call those stem cells. Okay, so that's meristematic tissue. Then there's also ground tissue. Ground tissue is the most common type of plant tissue, and they have a wide variety of functions, including storage of starches and oils, involvement in metabolism. They photosynthesize. That's pretty important for plants, right? They perform protein synthesis, that is, they make proteins, and of course also support. And I don't mean that they will listen to you talk on the phone. I mean that they hold its shape and they keep it strong and sturdy. So meristematic tissue, ground tissue. Then we've got dermal tissue. That is just a single layer of cells, so it's very thin, of course. It provides a shield between the environment and internal tissues, kind of like your skin does for you. That's why it's called dermal. They can stop many pathogenic bacteria and fungi, kind of like your skin. They prevent needed chemicals from leaking out of the plant. You know, kind of like how when your skin gets cut, blood leaks out of you. Very, very similar. Also, in roots, dermal tissue will absorb water and minerals that the plant needs. That's something that your skin doesn't do. So I guess we can safely say you're not a plant. Okay, so we've had meristematic tissue, ground tissue, dermal tissue, and if there's 4 types, then that means we must be at the last one, vascular tissue. They are not present in all plants, but they are present in most plants. They carry water and dissolved material that would be dissolved in water throughout the plant, kind of like blood vessels for you. In fact, your vascular system refers to all of your blood vessels. So there are a couple varieties of this vascular plant tissue. First, there is the xylem. That is non-living vascular tissue that carries water and dissolved minerals from the roots of the plant to its leaves. The other kind is phloem. That is living vascular tissue that carries sugar and organic substances throughout a plant. So we've got our 4 types of tissue: meristematic, ground, dermal, and vascular. I just remember them. And there are 2 types of vascular tissues, xylem and phloem. A major difference between xylem and phloem is that xylem is non-living tissue and phloem is living tissue. You might think, how can it be tissue if it's not living? Well, the outside surface of your skin, your epidermis, is not living. It's made of dead skin cells. And depending on how you want to define what counts as your body, your fingernails and your hair are not living. So it's not actually that uncommon to have a non-living part of a living creature. Okay. We're going to move on now to leaves. We're going to leave the other subject and yes, we're going to do leaves. So let's start with leaf anatomy, the various parts of leaves. First, there is the blade. That's the main part of the leaf. It's the part that when you think leaf, you think of. It's the blade. After that, we have the apex. That would be the tip of the blade, the very tipperoo, the tip of the leaf is the apex. Then we have the petiole. That is the small stalk that attaches the leaf to the stem. You might think of it as the stem of the leaf, but in this context, the word stem refers to the small branch to which the leaf is attached. So the leaf attaches to the tree with its own little stem, and that is called a petiole. And last of all, the stipule, which is a small stalk-like or leaf-like growth that are on most plants that cover the leaf when it first began to grow. This is actually a perfect time for this because it's still early in the spring and there's a lot of trees whose leaves are beginning to sprout. If you take a close look at the leaves in their current state, you may notice them. So there are 2 basic kinds of leaves: simple leaves and compound leaves. Take them or leave them. The simple leaves are characterized like this. It's one leaf that's attached to the stem with a single petiole. One leaf, one stem, simple leaf. A compound leaf, or maybe I should say compound leaves because they are not single. They are several leaflets attached with a single petiole. In this picture, you can see some clover. You may think of clover as being 3 leaves or 4 leaves. Well, those leaves are all attached with the same petiole. A leaf mosaic refers to the arrangement of leaves on a branch. Whenever you've got a branch with leaves on it, it's very unlikely that you're going to have just a single leaf on a branch. They're usually arranged in some sort of pattern. And there are a couple different leaf mosaics. First one on the list is alternate. That would be in the first picture, where it's one on one side, move down the branch a little, then there's one on the other side, move down the branch a little, then there's one on the other side. You can see the picture, right? That's an alternate leaf mosaic. That's the most common. Next is an opposite leaf mosaic, where instead of being one after the other, they are just in pairs on opposite sides of the branch. And the last one is a whorled leaf mosaic. These are actually most common among tropical plants. And instead of being one after the other or in groups, they are around the branch in groups moving down. So the leaf mosaic is the arrangement of leaves on a branch, and there are three varieties: alternate, opposite, and whorled. Speaking of arrangements of leaves, let's just talk about the arrangement of the leaf itself. There are lots of shapes of leaves, and I'm going to read the list as it goes down, but that's left to right across the top and then left to right across the bottom of the picture. First is linear. Linear, just a word that means like line shaped, and so it's the straightest, thinnest leaf. It kind of just looks like a blade of grass, doesn't it? Well, guess what? A blade of grass is a leaf, just for an herbaceous plant, and it is a linear leaf shape. After that, we have elliptical. An ellipse, is like a flattened, stretched out circle, so it's fairly roundish, not pointy, but it's also not proportionally circular. It's elliptical. After that is oval. Unfortunately, oval and elliptical almost mean the exact same thing in geometrical terms. But hopefully you can see some slight difference between the elliptical leaf and the oval one. I mean, you can't just name them all slightly squishy circle. You have to point out subtle differences and give them slightly different names. Okay, the next one is deltoid. Now, if you know what the word delta means with reference to, say, geography, you know that a delta is a triangular shape. Well, deltoid basically is just the adjective form of that, meaning triangularly shaped. And as you can see, it looks like a triangle. Okay, after that is cordate. So that would be the one on the top right. And cordate is actually related to a word referring to a heart. So if you look at it upside down, it's kind of heart-shaped. If you know the suits in a deck of playing cards, it kind of looks like a spade, right? Okay, so let's go along the bottom row now. After cordate, we have orbicular. Orbicular is probably the funniest word on this list, and orb, is like a round thing. So orbicular basically just means round thing, as you can tell, quite round. After that is lobed. Now, you have lobes, these little tag things on your ears that hang down. So a lobe is just a thing that sticks out. Well, if you look at a lobe leaf, it's got like a bunch of little things sticking out. They're not sharp, they're kind of round and flabby, like those things. So, lobed leaf. That's the leaf shape. It's lobed. After that, we have cleft. Now, cleft refers to a word meaning broken into pieces. And the cleft leaf shape looks as if it's been split. It has parts sticking out like the lobed leaf does, but it's not, smooth and loopy. It's kind of sharp and jagged, as if it's been broken apart. Thus, cleft is the name of the leaf shape. The last two are not necessarily what you would consider leaves, because when we think of leaves, we think of those broad, flat things, but these are also leaves, and we owe them our respect. The needle-like leaf shape is the kind that you would find on pine trees. They are leaves, they're green, they grow on the end of branches, and they perform photosynthesis. They are leaves, and they are a leaf shape called needle-like. The last one is called scale-like. Once again, not what you would ordinarily think of when you think of leaves. However, there are some trees that have scale-like leaves, and now that you know about them, you will notice them everywhere as soon as you're allowed to go outside again. So we've got the leaf shape, but there's another detail about leaves that we need to know, and that's called the margin. It refers to the pattern, the detail, on the edge of the leaf. So there is one leaf margin called entire, which is just a smooth line, like if you were to trace it, it would just be a single smooth motion with your pencil, right? Just a single smooth motion with your pencil. All right, next is serrate. Now, if you know what a serrated knife is, they're the ones with like the little jagged teeth on them, like a saw. Well, a serrate leaf margin kind of looks like a serrated knife or a saw blade. It's got all those teeny little points on it. If you make those teeny little points larger so that they're like teeth, well then you've got a dentate leaf margin. That would be like serrate, but the points are larger. Turn the points around so it's more like a billowy cloud, and we call that crenate. Those are not very common around here. If you try to find those outside, you're actually going to be surprised at how uncommon they are. Last one is undulate. There is a verb to undulate, which basically means to wave and wiggle. So, an undulate leaf margin, it's wavy. Okay, so we've got leaf shape, leaf margin. There's another detail about leaves that we need to know. It's called their venation. That is the pattern of leaf veins. There are three kinds. They are parallel, pinnate, and palmate. So parallel means exactly what you think it does, like it does in geometry. It's a bunch of lines that are all going in the same direction, kind of like the lines on a road that divide the lanes. They all move together. Okay, so there's a parallel leaf venation. After that is pinnate. And pinnate has a midrib that goes straight down from the petiole to the apex. And kind of like the alternate leaf mosaic, you've got the veins moving out on either side from that midrib. The last one, palmate, doesn't have that regular pattern like the parallel or pinnate one does. Instead, it branches out and just goes crazy. Kind of like if you were to look at a river from high up in the air, or maybe from space. It's got that same kind of look. So leaves have a lot of large-scale structure, but they also have an interesting microscopic structure. Now, this picture probably looks completely crazy, but I'm going to make sure to give you all the details that you need to know to understand it. Before we get there, I just want you to notice a couple of things. We're looking at a little section of leaf. As thin as a leaf is, we're looking at a section of it. And the cells are tightly packed in the top, and you see there's a lot of space beneath. And I don't know if you noticed, but there's also a little hole in the bottom. I'm going to tell you what all those are as soon as we get to them. But first, the epidermis. The epidermis is a single layer of cells that covers the top and the bottom of the leaf. Sometimes it secretes a waxy substance called cuticle. If not, though, it often will grow hairs, giving it a velvety appearance. Those spiny hairs are actually a defense mechanism. If you live near the woods and you're able to get out there to find some leaves, or maybe you just have memories of doing this previously, maybe you found fuzzy leaves before, you found them kind of interesting. Well, there you go. That's a defense mechanism. Obviously not against you, because it can't really do much against you. It's against tiny things, like bugs that would get stuck in those hairs. Okay, more microscopic leaf structure. There is something called stomata. Those are tiny holes on the underside of a leaf. That was the tiny hole that we saw in the picture. They allow for an exchange of gases with the atmosphere. So it's kind of like how the leaf breathes. Each one is flanked by 2 guard cells. They open and close the stomata. They photosynthesize special sugars. The sugars actually regulate water pressure in the guard cells. So what happens is when those guard cells have a higher pressure, they swell up and they close the stomata. But when they have lower pressure, they shrink down and they open the stomata. So stomata are tiny holes in the underside of a leaf that help the leaf exchange gases with the atmosphere, like breathing. The stomata open and close that is governed by light levels. So high light levels, when it's sunny out, it promotes photosynthesis. So that's when those guard cells shrink down and they open the stomata. The stomata close in low light levels, like when it gets dark, to avoid unnecessary water loss due to evaporation. Whenever water is lost through a living organism, like it's being drawn up by a tree's roots and it's being evaporated out the leaves, that is called transpiration. So basically, light triggers the guard cells to close or open the stomata, depending on whether it's time to do photosynthesis or time to conserve water. So parenchyma tissues form 2 layers of oval-shaped, chloroplast-rich cells under the epidermis. That sentence was a mouthful. Let me translate that for you. There's 2 layers of cells under the epidermis, 2 layers of cells in the leaf. And they are formed by parenchyma, a fancy science word, but make sure to notice chloroplast rich. If you remember learning about the parts of a cell, the chloroplast is the organelle in plant cells that perform photosynthesis. So I think we might be about to learn about photosynthesis. First, there is the palisade mesophyll. They are packed tightly on the top to maximize quantity. Remember in the picture, those cells that were crowded at the top? Those were palisade mesophyll. The cytoplasmic streaming cycles the chloroplasts around, so each has a chance to absorb sunlight. So picture this. At the top of the leaf, there's a whole bunch of cells under the epidermis that are crowded up against the top. And inside of those cells, the chloroplasts all get a turn up at the surface, so they can do as much photosynthesis as possible. Then there's the spongy mesophyll. The spongy mesophyll has air gaps which are filled with fresh air from the stomata. Remember in the picture there's holes in the bottom and the cells that weren't packed closely together? That's where fresh air can get in and be a supply of carbon dioxide for the photosynthesis. The air gaps permeate the spongy mesophyll and can reach the palisade mesophyll, from the bottom, so that all the photosynthesizing cells have access to air. So it's vented on the bottom, so the leaf can breathe, and it's packed on the top, so they can do as much photosynthesizing as possible. Even inside the photosynthesizing cells, the chloroplasts take turns circulating between top and bottom to get sunlight. Amazing. Unbelievable. No? Okay. Never mind. So, moving on to microscopic leaf structure of the veins. The veins are actually made of 3 tissues. Vascular tissue, which we've already talked about. Remember, that's xylem and phloem. Say, can you remember which one of those is made of living tissue? I'm going to just see if you can remember that for yourself. I'm going to move on. Then there's also collenchyma, which are thick-walled cells that support the vein. Okay, so remember, vascular tissue was one of the 4 kinds of tissue that are in plants. And within vascular tissue, there were 2 structures, xylem and phloem. Phloem was a living one, by the way. And to support xylem and phloem is collenchyma, thick-walled cells that support the vein. Where does leaf color come from? Well, chlorophyll is green, and chlorophyll is the necessary primary ingredient in photosynthesis. Higher concentrations of chlorophyll make a darker shade of green. Typically, the tops of leaves are darker than the bottom. Have you ever noticed that? If you haven't noticed yet, I bet you'll notice next time you see a leaf, particularly when it's windy right before a storm and the leaves kind of get blown up. You can see the underside of the leaves, and they look a lot paler than the top of the leaves. So it's not just chlorophyll. Actually, there are other pigments that are present in leaves. For example, plastids contain pigments, starches, and oils. Plastids are organelles in plant cells. So in most leaves, chlorophyll is dominant, but other colors may show, particularly in a certain season that we are not in right now that maybe you can think of. Maybe that picture's reminding you of it. It's the fall. Okay, so there are other chemicals, for example, carotenoids. That is a class of pigments. They're typically yellow or orange. There are also anthocyanins. I love saying that. There's so many things in science that are hard to pronounce, but once you learn how to pronounce one of them, I just love to say it. Anthocyanin. Anyway, anthocyanins. They are a pigment whose color depends on the pH of the leaf tissue. Now, pH refers to whether something is acidic or basic. So, if you've got a leaf that has a low pH, it's kind of more acidic than other leaves, it may have some bright, unusual color. And there are some leaves that are not green, like these pictures show you. And the reason that they aren't green is because they contain anthocyanins, which alter the color due to the pH of the fluid inside the leaves. So, speaking of leaves and their colors changing, there is a certain quality about leaves that we tend to notice in the fall besides their color changing, and it is their disappearance. So, a deciduous plant is a plant that loses its leaves in the winter. They do that to conserve water through the winter. Remember that in low light levels, the guard cells around the stomata are triggered to swell up and shut the stomata. It's to conserve water. Well, if you're not doing a lot of photosynthesizing in winter, either because it's so cold that the water's freezing or because there's just not enough sunlight because the sun never goes up high enough, then might as well just cut the leaves off and stop supporting them. They're a waste of resources. There's also the abscission layer. That is a thin layer of tissue at the base of the petiole on each leaf of a deciduous plant. If you remember what the petiole is, that is the tiny, little mini stem that every leaf has to hold it onto the branch. So the cells in the abscission layer block the xylem and phloem when the days shorten. Remember, the xylem and phloem are the veins of the plant. They're made out of vascular tissue, and they get blocked off in the abscission layer when the days get shorter. So this is based not on the temperature. The tree's not shutting its leaves off when it gets cold. It shuts them off when the day gets shorter. So this is actually going to kill the leaves. Probably not a surprise that if you shut the veins off, then the thing dies. This also will stop the production of chlorophyll, so the other pigments can be seen. The green disappears, and the anthocyanins, the carotenoids, they all become visible. So that's why the leaves turn color in the fall. Also, it starts chemical reactions that produce anthocyanins and change leaf pH. As the leaf dies, it starts to transform chemically, and the pH can change. That's another reason that the leaves change color. Now, if a leaf does not have anthocyanins, then they don't turn bright, gorgeous colors. They turn brown. Can you think of any leaves that turn brown in the fall? Maybe you can, maybe you can't, but I'm sure you will remember them as soon as fall actually comes. So, speaking of leaves that turn brown, there is a product of leaf tissue breakdown called tannic acid. Now, tannic acid is actually common in a lot of plants. And in fact, this is something that you can do at home. If you have any tomatoes, that's a really good place to get them. But if you don't have tomatoes or you don't like eating tomatoes, you can also do grapes. Really sour fruit's a good choice, but tomatoes and grapes are really good for this. If you eat a whole bunch of those, your mouth starts to have this kind of like leathery feeling. Like you start to lose sensitivity in your tongue or like the inside of your cheek. Do you ever feel that? That's actually tannic acid reacting with the protein in the tissue of your mouth. It's one of the reasons why it's not uncommon to have cheese at the same time that you're eating a vegetable or fruit like tomatoes and grapes. Because instead of reacting with the proteins in your mouth, the tannic acid will react with the proteins in the dairy. And so if you have, say, like mozzarella on a tomato slice or blocks of cheese with grapes, it makes the experience of eating it more enjoyable because you don't have that weird leathery feeling in your mouth. It's also another reason why some people prefer to have milk or cream in their coffee, or what's something else that they like to have milk or cream in? Well, anyway, if you boil dead leaves, it will actually release tannic acid into the water. And if you happen to have a leaf that doesn't contain poison and it has a pleasing odor or smell, you can actually drink that water. Oh, tea! I can't believe I forgot about this. Well, it's probably all cold now, and it's been steeping for half an hour, so I think maybe I'm going to have to make myself another cup. You should have one too. It'll make you feel better. I'll see you next time.